done a lot of work without funds and at much personal sacrifice. But no man living has revealed as many important facts about the Negro race as Rogers. Commented by Henry L.N. Anderson, Rogers is a walking encyclopedia. Joel Rogers' achievements include being a member of the American Geographical Society, the Academy of Political Science, the Paris Society of Anthropology. He also was a speaker at the International Congress of Anthropology, opened by Paul Dumas, who was then the president of France. His books and personal library are now at Fisk University. This is our brother, J.A. Rogers. And one of the keys is, as I look down, the brother who is videotaping our presentation really had a lot to do with this entire series, because many of you who are in the Per Ankh, we have been involved in the Kemetic origin of the universe, very deep in Kemetic legacy, Egyptian Shabaka stone and pieces like that. But I would say it had to have been at least 4 years ago that I was approached by the Grassroots Productions and asked to do a series of presentations, of which I did, particularly on the Moors, of which I had just been deep in my research. And Brother Big Man, who has his office on 125th Street, right down the block from Malcolm X Boulevard, right outside Golden Crust, I believe, or near there, with videotapes and books and pictures. He was part of the organization of Grassroots that asked me to do a presentation at the Fort Greene Senior Citizens Home, which I did. But as I was speaking about the Moors, there was something that I had said. And what I said was that there's no way that you can understand the condition that we find ourselves as an African-American people today. You cannot understand the position that we find ourselves in today if you don't understand what happened in October of 1492. I said you can't understand what happened in October of 1492 without understanding what happened January 2nd, 1492. You can't understand what happened January 2nd, 1492 if you don't understand the Crusades. And you cannot understand the Crusades if you don't understand the Moors. That is how I framed this. Because as a historian, as Professor John Henry Clark has often taught us, and as I always quote him, it is he who has told us that history is like a clock that people use to tell their political time of day. He said that history is a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. And he often used to tell me that you can't get over on a historically conscious person. You can mess with them, you can force them to do something, but you can't make them do it without being mindful of the fact of what condition they find themselves in. And I think that one of the great challenges that we find ourselves in as a people, no matter how we may look at this, politically, economically, culturally, whatever, it is basically is that we do not know ourselves. We don't know what we have done. And as J.A. Rogers pointed out, much of what we have done has been masked in other people's accomplishments. They have changed the faces of our greatest heroes and sheroes, and literally, shamefully, painted their faces on them, so that they could get credit for something that they never did. That's something totally different. The question is not what's wrong with them, the question is what's wrong with us. And as someone who has moved through this and been with our children, I just refuse to allow, at least from my own individual perspective, I cannot and will not allow this to continue from my own perspective. So we are attempting to do something to make things happen. So I thank my brother Big Man for him encouraging me to do the kind of research that after I did the piece on the Moors, they brought me back to do a series on the Crusades. But like I told Brother Big Man and Brother Leon Muhammad, there's no way that I could ever present the Crusades in one presentation. It's just too phenomenal. It's just too much information. And I wouldn't do the community justice by just coming and giving a brief overview of something that took much more. If not an entire season we're going to spend when we get into the Per Ankh. We're going to spend a couple of seasons on the Crusades, just to understand the impact that the Crusades had on where we find ourselves today. But this three-part series on the Crusades allowed me to do enough research to open up a whole nother understanding of what was going on. Because of this, Brother Big Man was very anxious to develop an understanding of J.A. Rogers, because J.A. Rogers, we don't know him in our community. We don't celebrate what this brother did in terms of his books. And his book, Sex and Race, the 3 volumes, of which this is one of the volumes here. This is volume 3. This is the cover for volume 3. This is where a lot of the material on Beethoven comes from. But the key about Sex and Race is not just what he says, it's the amount of pictures that you see that clearly show you the role that we have played in our own history. All of this European history that we give so much credit for other people. All of the things that go on. Some of the things that we'll talk about today about Beethoven and about just Alexander Dumas, to understand who he was and who his family was and where they came from, the things that they achieved. Changing the way in which plays were being done in Europe was the third son accomplishments. The writer of the Three Musketeers, the Count of Monte Cristo, the Man in the Iron Mask, was the second son's achievements. And by the way, when he wrote the Three Musketeers, the second son, there were 3 of them. There was the general, there was the novelist, and there was the playwright. It was the novelist that wrote the Three Musketeers, but when he wrote the Three Musketeers, he was thinking about his father and his son. They were the Three Musketeers. So that when you go back and you read this book and our children are told that this is a classic, what we don't understand is that the very nature of the Three Musketeers was a brother writing about his father and his son being some of the most dynamic forces in current day France. So that when we see all of these different things being written about the Three Musketeers, and they're doing these movies over and over again, and the Man in the Iron Mask, and calling these the classics, even then we don't know that these are our classics. Just like we don't know that Beethoven, who rewrote the whole concept of what would become classical music, was a brother. And if you listen to some of the work of this brother, Beethoven, as we'll play his music through the presentation, and then pick up something by Thelonious Monk or Art Tatum, and listen to what they're doing underneath it. For those of us who appreciate jazz, you can't appreciate jazz and classical music. And I remember I used to always play classical music in my classrooms. And I remember people would come in, they would say, you know, I'm surprised you're playing that. And it is because of the concept that because I am pro-African and I push African, they think that classical music is European. And so that when I play classical music, somehow I'm not identifying with my own culture. And I always respond to them, don't you know where it came from? And they have problems understanding this because it is so ingrained in their head that they did everything, that to even think that Beethoven could be anything other than an African, as you can see, as Brother Smedley's picture shows you. But not just that, Beethoven's teacher, probably one of the finest musicians, the father of what is known as the modern symphony, Joseph Haydn, was a brother. He was known as the Blackamoor, and that's the name that they gave Africans in Europe. The house that Beethoven lived in. There's a book that I read, it's called Beethoven's Hair, by Russell Martin. You see, the thing, if you look at the pictures, the one thing that Europe always talked about on Beethoven was his hair. There was something they couldn't get over. They couldn't get over why his hair looked like that. They called it springy. They called it corky. He was a natural brother. He had a natural. He was the predecessor to the Afro, if you want to get to that. Yet because of the nature, we couldn't fathom that this could be a brother with the dreadlocks. But in this book right here, it is quoted that the house that Beethoven lived in was called Schwarze Spanierhaus, which in the language means the Black Spaniard's house. That's what they called it. You see, what has happened is that they have whiteout. It's called whiteout. You know what whiteout is? Well, that's what they've done in the history. They white it out. And so that now we are looking at a history that's been rewritten. That they there will say that we are revisionists. We're not revisionists. We're just rewriting it the way it should be done. And when I say rewrite, I mean R-E-R-I-G-H-T, not W-R-I-T-E. We are rewriting it. We're bringing it back to the way it was. His contemporaries, as we talk about what his contemporaries said, always spoke about how dark he was, about how ugly he was. That's how you know he was a brother. They're the first to always call him how ugly he was, how wide his nose was, how